Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Polo Reef and Champion Lighting and Supply. Hey, welcome back to the show. My name is Keith, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Dong. Dong, how you doing these days?
Oh, very good. Very busy.
Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah.
What's keeping you so busy?
This.
Just that one tank, or all the tanks behind you?
All the tank behind me. They are like on high gear. So they produce too much.
You're getting too much coral production.
Yep. Now I'm selling colonies.
You're selling colonies.
Yeah, the whole colonies. Go. Go.
Well, I'm looking forward because you're going to come pay me a visit in a few weeks to pick up some corals, and I'm very excited to host you. It's going to be the first time you've come out here to Vermont. I've always been willing to come down there to your place in the Boston area, but that should be pretty cool, Dong, to have you here, check out my systems and all that stuff. So
yes, that's why I'm making room here.
Nice. Make a lot of room.
Yeah, make a lot of room. I actually have one frag tank is basically all empty out.
Oh, wow.
Ready for the new coral.
All right.
And continue to make more space available.
Good
so people who want to come over here and grab some of my vintage coral, please come.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely worth the visit. Totally recommend checking out Dong's place. But so this is going to be a really cool show because we're going to be talking about the import-export business with our friend Mr. Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture, and also Nic Dos Santos from Australia, who has a lot of experience exporting corals. So we're going to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of that whole part of the reef keeping business. But before we bring our guests on, I want to thank the sponsors who are supporting this live stream. Polo Reef. Make sure to check out Polo Reef's latest YouTube videos. And their most recent video, a brutal cold snap hits Polo Reef. It's been really cold here in the East.
And unusual.
Yeah. And the team is suddenly dealing with problems on multiple fronts. When a heater malfunctions in one of the outdoor koi ponds, the water temperature begins dropping fast, putting prize championship koi at risk inside the facility. The day gets even busier. John and Joe discover that one of the reef tanks has been overtaken by a serious algae bloom. That happens to everybody, right? Meanwhile, Andrew takes the opportunity to experiment with lighting adjustments, something he always enjoys testing to improve coral color and growth. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to @Polo Reef on YouTube so don't miss any of their new videos when they drop. Also, Champion Lighting and Supply. Many thanks to Todd at Champion for sending me the Reef Delight Lens Port and Coral Lens. Dong's got one of those puppies there as well. This is some video I shot from the one I have. It's fantastic. I highly recommend picking one up. It's incredible. It's a game changer. You put it on your phone. It's a top-down viewing box, and it takes incredible shots, whether it's video or photos. I'm a big fan. So to pick yours, pick up one, visit championlighting.com. All right. Well,
I'm trying to adapt this thing to a DSLR, the digital camera.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah,
I got a full frame, man. Full frame.
Yeah, nice. And another toy. Well, let's add our guest to the live stream. What's happening there, Nick? What's happening there, Chris?
Hey, pretty good.
How's it going?
Nick, it's like Wednesday morning there, huh?
It certainly is. Certainly is.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. And Chris, buddy, it's always a pleasure having you back on the show. So we're going to be talking about the import-export business. I don't know. Nick, Chris, do you guys want to kind of give a quick summary of what the whole coral import-export business is about? I know it's probably not something you can summarize quickly, but maybe but maybe just for those folks that are not that familiar with that part of the business, just kind of give us a brief description of what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, I think a basic nutshell is that we all enjoy these reefs of ours around the world, and it's about ensuring we look after these animals, and we nurture them. They're quite precious to us all, not only in the hobby but also in the ocean as well. So there's a lot of respect involved, and a hell of a lot of time that goes into actually making it happen.
It's definitely, over the years of importing, I can tell from supplier to supplier who truly loves what they're doing and then who just, wants to do it for a buck. And I've learned over the years to weed out the people that just want to do it for a buck, because you just can't change their ways of doing things. Even though the experience from importing so many coral shipments over the last 18 years that, if somebody doesn't want to change because you know how to get something into your port, and they just want to continue doing things their way, that's when it's cut the ties. Because and Nic will tell you straight up, sending corals to me over here on the East Coast of the US is probably one of the longest travel times he has for a coral shipment to go. So it doesn't matter where you are, because it's all pretty much in the same general area of the world, about halfway around the world from where we are. Travel time is quite long, and packing is extremely important. And also the suppliers that we been using, for some of them we've been using for 15 years, we've used them for so long because they first of all become like family. They love the corals, they respect the corals, they clean the corals, they make sure that the corals don't have all kinds of wild sponges and things like that on them when they put them into a bag, because that's detrimental to the animal itself, especially on a travel to meat. Going to a shorter distance, it might not be as big of a problem, but coming to ACI, it's definitely needs to be, the stems of the corals in the crevices and cracks of like a Pachycepta, that stuff should all be cleaned out of there. If it's not, it ends up dying on travel, and then it fouls out the water. Then the coral either comes in unhealthy or dead. And I've gotten, I don't even know how many shipments I gotten from Nic over the years, but
a lot.
It was a learning curve for him shipping all the way to me. I remember the first acro shipment. He was like, dude, he's like, I thought I did this right. We had good success, but the next one that came, he listened to everything I said to him, and it came in flawless. And that was, if you can ship acroporas from Indonesia and Australia all the way to ACI, we're talking sometimes 72 hours in the box.
Wow.
And they come in alive, you're in good shape.
What are some of those things, Chris, that you told Nic in terms of the keys to success for shipping, acros?
Well, one of the things that he didn't do on his first shipment was he didn't float the acros.
Yes.
Oh.
And I said, you got to float them. Now I've gotten them from other suppliers that they pack differently. Some pack with bigger, wider bags and not as deep of water, with still a good amount of oxygen in the bag. And others pack with more water in a smaller bag and about the same amount of oxygen in the bag. And that was one of the things that Nic knows his packing method, and I helped him tweak that packing method for shipping the corals all the way over to us. I think our first shipment had to come into LA. And going to LA, that's also, for me, that's another headache I have to deal with. I'd rather have it come directly to the port where I pick it up. But we had to really do some tweaking on the packing because of the extra time travel. Because once it lands in LA, it's another 24 hours till I can even pick it up. And then if it's delayed from there, it could be, a day and a half longer than what, say, the LA wholesalers would get them, the day that it arrives in LA, where I'm waiting a day and a half later is when I'm finally picking it up. So, but
some of the little things that I can add that really made it successful for us is actually finding the right transshipper guy in LA that would actually listen to us. And when the water's stagnant in the bags and they're just sitting there on a trolley waiting for this transit, it's just a matter of having someone that will just simply go past every 15 minutes to half an hour and give them a shake, disrupt the
Oh.
surface of the water
really?
within the bag,
Huh.
allow the oxygen to exchange through the water. That was, some of those little things really add up to making sure that that oxygen within the bag is continually exchanging through. But if they sit there for a long period of time, we had a lot die sometimes. It's those key things of making sure that that process is streamlined and finding, and like Chris is saying, you've got to find people that will listen. And that's probably one of the biggest and the hardest parts, is finding people that will actually listen and respond and do what the customer is asking, and making that transition process work really well.
One of the things that, was hard for me to deal with was a supplier that I kept saying, you need to change the pack. You need to put this particular species in a little bit more water, a bigger bag. And next time I would get a shipment and it wouldn't come in any different, and I'd have the same issues. The one supplier in Australia that I was using for a little while, I cut it off because every time I told him to do something, nothing would change, and I'd have to wait 2 to 3, 4 weeks before I could sell some of the corals that came in, because they were just so stressed and in bad shape that it took them that long to recover, to the point where I was comfortable enough putting them back in a box and in a bag and shipping them to one of my customers. And some places wouldn't do that. Some places would just get it in and move it out. And that's what I think is probably the saddest part of this industry, is it's $1 to people and it's no care in the world about it. It's once it's out of their hands, they don't care.
Yeah.
And that's personally on the import side here, I think that transshipping shouldn't even be allowed, because
Correct.
That is not somebody that actually cares about the corals themselves.
What's a transshipper?
A transshipper is I don't transship, I import. So I have the license, I import the corals, I bring the corals to my facility and tank them, and then package them up, a week to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the species, depending on how the corals look. That's shipping to a wholesaler. A transshipper is somebody that is sitting behind a computer, typing on a computer screen, selling to their customers. Yep. I've got this box full of these corals coming in. Here's the price of it. Do you want it? Okay. They get it in at LA, and then they transfer it to their customers, send it to their port or their airport from LA. So they don't even touch the corals. A transshipper doesn't even touch it. Sometimes they reox stuff. And it all depends, I guess, on where it's going and what it is actually that's coming in. But I used transshippers back in the day, and most of them didn't even do anything to it. They just moved box from landing, cleared from Fish and Wildlife, to the next airport or next airplane to come to me. And you can tell easily that from Australia it's a little harder, because you guys use tipper ties or clippers over there to clip your bags, but from Indonesia they use rubber bands still. So somebody tells me that they're reoxing the coral in LA, and it comes in and there's still rubber bands on the bag. I'm like, there's nobody in LA using a rubber band. I'm sorry, not reox this. But they charged me $20 to reox that ship.
Yeah.
And that's
about the money.
Yeah. And that's where the problems end up arising with the industry, with people having problems with certain species of coral, is if they're used to buying them from a transshipper, they're buying them and then they're receiving them 24 hours after they land in LA, and they don't ever get a chance to settle in and rest. And I'll give you a perfect example. Wall hammers, or Fimbriophilia ancora. Indonesian Fimbriophilia ancora have a really bad rap here in the US. Aussies, not as much, because Nic would cut these things up into pieces. They'd come with cuts on the side of them. And I remember the first time I got that, I was like, why are you cutting these things up? They're like, man, the colonies are like this big. We can't ship them. But it's a big difference when, somebody like Nic goes and collects a big monster colony like that, cuts it up into 20 pieces. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, Nic, but wouldn't you sit on this coral for a month before you would send it out so that it was healed properly, so it had a fighting chance?
Yeah. I had mega rules in my facility. Not a single piece of coral would leave my facility without being there for a minimum of a month. And you know, when we talk about how I make my exporting work so well, you know, it's a very, very extensive program that most people would be scared away from, because it is very extensive on what partakes in ensuring that you're respecting the person, like Chris at the other end, and you know, if I improve his business, it improves my business. So there's a lot of things there, ensuring the health of the coral, and making sure that that transition process is streamlined and smooth, so that he receives coral that he can pull out of a bag and sell the next day. Because, you know, then he's making money, I'm making money, but everyone's smiling because no coral's dying.
Exactly. Well, and that's where, you know, the difference between a transshipper and an importer that wholesales or tanks the corals. So when that transshipper gets those Indonesian hammer corals in, you know, they're stressed out really bad. You know, Indonesian, you know, my Indonesian suppliers really have gotten it dialed in. I've taught them all kinds of different methods on how to pack and ship a Fimbriophilia ancora, or even a divisa. All the wall euphilias tend to be very delicate, especially on the stress side of it when they're stressed. But once they're tanked, you know, they really just blossom into beautiful pieces of coral. And you can tell, like I don't get as many wall hammers or frog spawns as I used to, because they know that my customer base is still scared of them in most cases. And what I like to do is I like to just show people, okay, I put a picture of a wall hammer up. I guarantee you that wall hammer hasn't been just tanked a week before. It's been here for weeks, sometimes months, before I'm willing to put it back into the box and ship it. So I'll take a photo of that coral, and it'll be, you know, the skeleton's 3 inches, but the coral is opening up to, you know, 8 inches. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And you should be able to see the oral discs of the hammer coral as the flow is going. If the coral isn't healthy, it's going to be sucked in. It might be open and flowy, but the oral discs aren't visible. And if the oral discs aren't visible, the coral's not healthy enough personally for me to put back into a box and ship it to somebody, because the chances of it, you know, coming to them alive is good, but it gives them that bad taste when in a week's time it goes downhill because of the stress that it's been put under, and it never had a chance to fully recuperate. So there's a lot involved, like Nic said. I mean, conditioning the corals and making, again, some species you have to do this with. Other species, they don't care. I mean, you could leave them sitting out of the water for an hour and put them back in and they're fine. You do that with the Fimbriophilia and it's going to be like, no, I'm not going to open up again or I'm going to die. So
definitely,
that's why I personally don't think transshipping is something that should be even allowed, because at that point, the animals aren't the top priority. And ACI and Keith, I've said it on your show a bazillion times. The first thing that we care about is the corals, and we will take all of the hits if anything isn't going to make it, rather than trade it for $1 and have an angry customer or have somebody that has a bad taste in their mouth because we sent them something that wasn't healthy enough to travel again. Now, if a walk-in comes in, it's on them. A lot of the times a walk-in's like, I can make it better. It'll be fine. It's only going to be an hour and a half in the bag. I'll take it back to my facility. That's all fine and good. But if it's a customer that's flying in from out of state, which I have a handful that do, and the coral was just tanked, you know, usually it's just tanked hours before they get there and they want to take it. I'm like, no, I'm not putting it back into a bag. And
that's how you get a bad reputation.
What's that?
That's how you get a bad reputation.
Exactly. But then I've got others that will fly down and then rent a car and drive back. I'm okay. I know how you're going to be handling it on the way back, and I'll pack it bigger than I would pack it to normally ship it, so that there's a lot more water in the bag and it's a lot less stress on the animal. And I don't have to worry about the extra cost and freight for the customer, which is always in the back of my head. And I don't know how many times you've heard this, Nic, but what I got from a lot of the supply line that I have been introduced to now is I'm trying to save you money. No, you're not saving
No,
me
you're losing
any
me money. Yep.
What's that?
You're losing me money. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what happens. You know, if the coral's packed in too small of a bag and not enough water, it makes it to me alive, but I have to sit on it for a month before I can sell it. I lost money. I didn't make any money. And that's where the one guy I was dealing with just couldn't wrap it around his head. And he just continued to ship the same way he always shipped. And I finally just said, I'm done. I can't do it anymore because it's the animals that are coming in that I never would lose from Nic. I mean, when I would tank a shipment from Nic, if I had a DOA, it was a couple, you know, that's a long travel. You know, you get 600-800 corals on a shipment, you got 2 DOAs. That's pretty damn good. I mean, you know, especially at 72 hours in the box, you know. So bottom line, there's a lot involved with importing, especially if you're a wholesaler. If you're a transshipper, totally different story. And honestly, they should just not allow it. But I don't think that'll ever happen. We're in a capitalist country, right? Do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, you know, last month on the show, we talked a lot about shipping and the issues around shipping in terms of reliability dropping, but also about how the costs have been going way up. And I'm you know, my understanding is the same thing is happening in terms of shipping stuff, you know, overseas into the States. I mean, the freight costs are going way up. And so that just seems to be a big variable involved here in terms of the quality of the stuff, right, that's getting shipped, because these people are trying to save money by having less water in the bag, which makes it a lighter box, and save money on the shipping, right? So, I mean, that seems to be the a logical reason for why they want to skimp in terms of the shipping process, right? It's just the pressure of the rising costs in shipping.
I look at it this way. When somebody's trying to say, we're going to save you some money by packing lighter, because your freight rate used to be $6 a kilo, now it's $11 a kilo. Well, when you break it all down, the amount of money you're going to save me is what, 50, 100 kilos? Honestly, that's like throwing away dollars to take everybody's pennies.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's wasting dollars to save pennies in reality. And, you know, because again, the animals, like Nic said, you need to listen to your customers, and you need to make sure that the animals are sellable, you know, within 24 to 48 hours. And some people do that with no issues. I still, to this day, have to have my corals here for a minimum of a week before I put them back into a bag and ship them. You know, with most species, there's certain species, like I said earlier, they just don't care. They're happy. They come in, and it's something we don't lose on a shipment hardly ever. But a big key thing in packing, if they are going to pack lighter, and Nic will, I'm going to let you chime in on this. From the time you collect the corals, tell them what happens from collection. Once they get tanked in your facility, what is your process? What do you do? Because there's all kinds of shapes and sizes of coral.
It's quite extensive. So, you know, I traveled all the way up and down the coastline. So, number one for me, corals are a very simple organism. You know, they eat food at nighttime. They use photosynthetic correlation with the algae to gain energy. And then, you know, and then they spawn, you know, so producing eggs and sperm. So you've got to remember, when you've got a sensile animal that you know lives in one place in the ocean, they sometimes battle for all of those things. So number one, when I'm traveling to certain places here on the coastline, I have to combat the changes in alkalinity, calcium, salinity. You know, you're coming from a reef environment when I'm doing aquaporas from out wide, you know, so I've gone, you know, I involve science in my business. So number one, I started doing ICP tests on the outside of the reef, the middle of the reef, the inside of the reef, the inshore, around the islands, and the boat ramps where I would actually come into. So, you know, my vessel would have, water that would be getting picked up from the ocean and pumped through tanks through those corals to maintain their health. And you're on a bumpy boat, so simply the holding system to hold those corals on the vessel, if the weather were to get rough, you need to make sure that you're not stressing that animal. So number one is empathy for the animal. They were attached to the reef. They were happy. They were healthy there. So I'm now removed them. So now I've just changed them. So I've changed I'm putting them into a partial shock. So everything I can do to ensure that that's streamlined process. So for Aquapora, I used to take specific water from my facility, and I would have that water held on the back of my truck in tanks, and that water would be maintained with oxygen, pure oxygen. I would have a chiller so that the temperature is maintained, so that when I'm taking corals from the outer reef and the water temperature is like 27, 28 degrees, I'm matching that. So I want to minimize anything. So before I leave for an Aquapora run, I actually increase my alkalinity and my calcium. So obviously everyone knows about doing that. You can't just go and throw both in the tank at the same time. So I would actually preload my truck with the appropriate water. Then I would do a little alkalinity dose to increase that. And then, a couple of, 2-3 hours later, I would then put a calcium. So I would increase it slightly, because when you snap those Aquapora off, they are going to be immediately going into a healing process. It's the same as us. Our body would be going into, you cut yourself, your body immediately goes into healing. So if the appropriate nutrients aren't in the water for them to do that, you'll find in the testing that I've done, extensive testing of collecting Aquapora, then taking them back and then measuring that water when I get back to my facility, you're talking, 6, 7, 8 hours later, I notice the drop in these. So what I do is I increase them to minimize that stress on the animal. So, and then once I've collected them, I'm coming back into very dirty water where the water can be, full of a lot of, massive amounts of nutrient. Everyone looks at it as dirty water, but it's actually, it's coral food, it's nutrients, it's what runs off the land. But you can shock an Aquapora because it's come from a low nutrient environment where it's more of a, so this is where we go into, talking about the different, levels of animal and plant that corals actually live in the ocean. So when you go to like inshore Aquapora areas, you've got Aquapora that would probably be more 50% animal, 50% plant. So you need to make sure that you match that. So when you go to the outer reef, you've got corals that are probably 80% plant, relying upon sun for nutrients and food, and they get minimal food at night time. So, you've got to have all of these things into consideration. So when I do an outer reef run, I've taken all of this into consideration, and then when I come back into the inshore, I have an oxygen bottle on the boat where I would actually stop the water flow from the ocean, and then I had a fast boat so that I could quickly get to the boat ramp, and then I would very quickly unload my coral directly into the truck, minimizing the time that they are out of the water, because that's a very key important thing. These animals live in water. They don't know what coming out of the water is. No, being exposed to the oxygen is something, again, that will shock them. And you'll get tissue necrosis if you prolong that period or shock the coral. This is what I've learned from many years of doing this. So, and then by the time I get back to my facility, that's just collecting, outer reef Aquapora, very clean. Water's always, 20, 30 meters visibility, very clean, low nutrient corals. So inshore Aquapora, totally different, very hardy, 50% animal, 50% plant can be sort of, you can be a little bit more tolerant, but, you still have to be careful in minimizing that stress. So, it's different with each at level. So when we get back to the facility, I had 3 incoming coral systems. So I had a specialist aquapora incoming coral system. I had an LPS incoming coral system. So, and those systems are maintained at certain different levels. Obviously the aquapora systems are kept quite clean. The inshore aquapora was kept with the LPS. So, and then what we would do is we would go through a cleaning, a dipping. So to minimize any, once you do your research, I did extensive research on aquapora diseases, coral diseases. So when you start looking at minimizing the stress on the animal, you need to, we would bring the aquapora back in. You don't immediately go and cut them. So sometimes it's a 18-hour day for me, 20-hour day to go on to the outer reef and to get them back to my facility. So we would actually put them into the system, let them rest, let them have some water flow around them, let them know that it's okay. You've now come to the Taj Mahal of aquariums, and you're going to get looked after. So the next day we would and obviously so I had a automatic system where we would actually do, and when they came into the facility, I'm talking, I'm bringing back in 2,000 pieces of aquapora for multiple orders. And we would have to make sure, so I would be ringing my staff and going, can you please do an alkalinity dose and a calcium dose, obviously in the appropriate times, so that when I put those 2,000 pieces of aquapora into my system, the system is not going to crash, you're not going to stress the animal out. And then the next day, we then dip them. We would then, cut them so that they would fit onto the foam. You got to think ahead. You've got to make sure that any penetration of that aquapora outside that foam will damage the bag. You can risk the puncturing of a bag. So it's very important that, not only when I collected every single piece, I made sure I collected them at the appropriate size. Another key component to maintaining your systems, maintaining your disease distribution to other people, is knowing about the diseases like redbug, aquaporating flatworm. They live within the, they live on the flesh. They live and eat on the flesh of the aquapora, but they come off to the dead component and lay their eggs. So my rules were, do not collect any aquapora that have got dead components on them. It's a humongous reef, I call it the Nemo, just keep swimming. Dory, there is another piece of aquapora. If this piece is beautiful, but it's got too much dead component on it, that would run the risk of any eggs coming back to my facility, no, leave it there, find another piece. It could grow, leave it there to spawn. You've got to think about future collection as well. So, we would then dip, and I had a very special aquapora and dipping tank. So it looked really, really weird, and most people look at it and go, what the hell is that? So I had a tank that you would basically dip the aquapora in, but it had different jets of water coming from multiple areas, so that you would basically dip the aquapora into it, and it would blast any of those aquaporating flatworm off. And then give it a clean, and then we would make sure we trimmed it so that there was no sharp edges that would penetrate the bag. So, and we would try and do this very, very quickly, so that, again, minimize the human touching of the coral, minimize your touch. And then we would then put them into a secondary holding system where we would, where the lighting is set to match what we had, again, minimizing the stress on the coral. So the other important part is, most of us, like behind you, Don, the lighting is coming from a specific area. You've got to remember that these corals have been sitting in one place in the reef. So when you put an aquapora in, you don't go and put a coral that's been facing this way, you don't go and turn it around and put it this way. Because when you're a simple organism that draws, 80% of their energy from the sunlight, it was very important to make sure that you put it the way that it was in the ocean, so that the light coming down, because being a simple organism that retrieves energy from sun or food, the food component not so bad, but with the aquapora, I found a good amount of success in, because if you were to change that aquapora and turn it slightly to the side, it's going to be going, oh crap, I've got to change where my algae is living within me. So you would put stress on the coral. The coral's going, oh crap, I'm going to be going into this low diet. I'm not going to be getting what I was getting in the ocean. I'm not going to be getting everything. So it will put energy into, it will stop producing eggs. It will stop producing sperm. It will stop everything, and it will put its energy into then changing its polyps to go this way now, not that way. If you put it sideways, it will put energy, it will stop everything else, and it will put energy into putting those tips to grow that way, because the sun's all of a sudden moved and it's going to another place. So, that's how deep I went into empathy for the animal. It's minimizing that stress. And then, obviously, once you've done that, it's about putting food in. Giving those guys the appropriate nutritious diet to ensure them. My food was very, I can thank the scientists that I had working for me that helped me make a very specialist food, which were full of amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. Lots of things that, quite very extensive food. I have to order things from many different places to put this food together. But it's ensuring that, if you have a sports injury, what are you going to do if you have a sports injury? You're going to make sure, number one, that you give yourself, your body, the appropriate nutrients to do the healing. You're going to do the appropriate exercise. You're going to do the recovery stuff. So it's no different for a coral. If you don't provide the coral with the appropriate food, nutrients to go, hey, we got you covered, buddy. We're going to put you in. We're going to replicate the life that you had in the ocean. We're going to replicate. We're going to give you better food than what you had in the ocean. So I found that everyone knows about tank hardening. So, when you start tank hardening a coral, I learned about a transitional period where the corals sort of, go, wow, oh my God, this is amazing. Or, with the wrong supplier, oh my God, this is shit. And then their health deteriorates, they lose color. It's the most popular coral in the world, but it is the hardest in the world to collect,
Keep happening.
maintain, ship, and keep alive, and to maintain those colors. And what I found is I got that process line of collecting them dialed in perfectly, but it was very, very extensive, as you can hear. It's not an easy thing. Most people would not partake in this, but when you get it right, when you have your systems in place, you have your processes and your procedures, it's actually easy. And as Chris says, it responds, because for me to respect my customer and making sure that I share my system parameters, my salinity, and talking to them about, like, hey, can you test the water when it gets there? If I can, so I had a packing system. So when I sent a shipment out to Chris, when we floated the corals, the procedure that I had was about minimizing the time that you spent putting the rubber bands around them and floating them. It was about getting it done quick. Corals don't come out of the water, you know, but it was also about adjusting that system yet again to compensate for the shift in nutrients, the calcium alkalinity. And then same again, we had specialist packing water. So we had packing water that had very fine air stone where we could saturate the water with oxygen, giving those corals the best time to have what they needed in the bag in that transition process. You know, filtered water, and we would always give corals a feed, you know, the day before it went. So that's why the packing systems were very important, because I knew when Chris's shipments were coming up, and I knew what I needed to do. So I gave them all a bloody good feed, you know, so that they were going to Chris's place to get the same, you know. And it was very important to be able to listen to your customer. I think it was probably the biggest key to success, is listening to your guys, talking about how, taking that time out to learn about, you know, how they were received, you know, what we can do to improve, you know, because me improving is Chris having a more fluent business. When he's more fluent, I'm making more money, I'm collecting more corals, you know, I'm getting the process streamlined, and DOA corals don't make money, you know, they drag it down. So doing all of this is very important.
It's extremely important.
And so,
hey, Nic,
you know, and
real
then
quickly, I want to just get this question in from Rob. Thank you, Rob, for that super chat. He was just curious. You mentioned the collecting 2,000 corals. How many divers did you need to collect those 2,000 corals? One.
Let's not go into that, guys, because I used to collect 2,000 pieces in about 2 hours on my own. Wow. I used to go to the hard line. I used to do a 3-hour boat ride to the hard line on my 9-meter trailable boat with twin 300s with 600 horsepower on the back. On the appropriate day, it'd take me 2.5 hours at 40 knots. And and I used to do it in 2 hours. But you got to remember, there's a lot more to collection, because I go to reefs where you cannot drop the anchor without smashing corals, and there's a component to that I'm actually helping the reef. I'm doing frags. When we go into reefs and aquapora reefs, but you know, I used to charter planes and I used to fly over the reef, and then I used to make marks of looking at specific environments. I know where aquapora grow, like microcladus, you know, anthocercis, grow in certain environments. And you need to learn what those environments are to find them in the appropriate numbers. But, you know, if you go onto the Reef Builder posts about me collecting aquapora on reefs, you know, it's about farming reefs. I had certain reefs that I would collect this year, and then I would leave them alone. I would go to the next lot of 3 hardline reefs, and then I would go even further north and go to more hardline reefs, so that by the time I got back to that first reef that I collected for a year, it would be 3 years before I got back there. And you don't take the whole colony. I farm my reef. I want to do this for many years. So I would take a little bit here and a little bit there, but leave the entire colony. But knowing those environments, I would go to a place that I'd have to go through some old videos to show you, but it's like aquapora on top of 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 aquapora. It's just, it's like I only collect from reefs where there is an abundance, and where spawning and reproduction on those reefs is very, very good and naturally replenishes itself. But when you start talking about reef systems and what I've seen over the last, 20, 30 years of diving, I've seen a lot of reefs and how they grow, how they evolve, how they get overgrown by, the fast-growing aquapora that actually end up smothering them. So
hey, Chris, I'm sorry, Nic. I was going to ask Chris if Nic is the exception to the rule here in terms of exporters.
Exception to the rule for, oh, yes. I mean, you're talking about a good one or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the thing that I loved about Nic was, you know, when I would get, you know, say an ACAM Pachycepta, and I don't know how this guy found the Pachyceptas, which everybody calls them Australian Lobos, but the ACAM Pachyceptas, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that everybody says Nic collects the best corals. He sent some of the craziest ACAM Pachyceptas I'd ever seen in my entire life, and he'd be like, I got a spot. And then they would come in, and you know, everybody knows them as, like I said, branching lobophilia, but they're a branching acanthastria, and they're extremely aggressive compared to lobos. But in between each of those branches, you know, nature is amazing because that coral is growing and it's making a home for other organisms like sponges, and, you know, got brittle stars and tunicates and different types of algae, and even other corals can grow in between the branches of some of these corals. And there's some supply line that I've gotten from, you know, many years ago, that they would come in and there would be, you know, an ACAM Pachycepta that I remember I had one supplier I used solely for many, many years until I got hooked up with Nic. And I never saw any of that other organisms growing in between the branches of these corals. And we're talking, you know, a space that's maybe a half of an inch, sometimes even smaller than that. And everybody that I've dealt with that was a good shipper, a good exporter, made sure that everything that was in between them when it was in the wild, that was perfectly fine living with that coral. Again, it's in the ocean. It's a big ass ocean, and it's not, you know, a recirculating system that, you know, you can have all these possible issues with, you know, those organisms not living. And then of course, when you put them into a bag and that organism gets pulled out of the water, say it's a sponge, that sponge doesn't do well out of the water and it dies. And then it dies while it's on travel for 72 hours to me. So I don't know if people have seen dead sponges and how bad they smell, but they're horrible. And that was one of the things that really was frustrating for me with certain supply lines that I would use, was that they'd still be sponges and tunicates, and heck, I'd find brittle stars, there'd be crabs, there'd be all kinds of stuff in between the polyps. And these were always the corals that were the roughest when they arrived to me. Maybe not necessarily to the LA guys when they would get them in, but for me, it has to be clean. If it's not clean, it means I can't sell it. You know, I can't sell it in a week. I can't sell it in a month, or it's going to end up dying because it was so far gone when it arrived to my facility. And I think with, you know, Nic was talking about the acropores, and I think it's awesome the way he explained, you know, how he takes care of acropores. And, you know, Nic is the exception to the rule in most cases. I've had plenty of other people that are as passionate about it as what he is. He takes it to the next level because he really, really does love, you know, these animals and respects the animals. But acropores don't really need nearly as much maintenance done to them from Australia as what LPS corals do. And the LPS,
and there's a whole new story there on how to even get them going, you know.
Inshore reefs are
huge.
Well, like you said earlier, inshore reefs, everybody calls them dirty water. Well, I always laugh at that term because there's no such thing as dirty ocean water. It's just silty or full of nutrients. That doesn't mean it's dirty. Dirty is just a dirty word. I mean, you know, I don't like hearing that because, you know, you can test the water parameters on an inshore reef and
call it nutrient-rich water.
Nutrient-rich water.
Yes.
But when we say nutrient rich in the ocean, we're not talking about like 10, 15, 20 nitrates and 0.05 or 0.5 phosphates. We're talking still very low in nutrient levels. I mean, Nic, you can tell me better than what I can. Tell me better than what I can.
So I've done extensive ICP testing all over the reef and the inshore. So here in Australia, we have a lot of mangrove areas, like mud, like crazy mud. Like, and you go to an area and you look in the water and you're like, it looks like a cup of chocolate, a hot chocolate. It just literally looks like hot chocolate. But, you know, you scoop up a bucket of that in a white bucket and it's crystal clear, not almost crystal clear. But, you know, I've done ICP tests on where mud crabs live, and it's amazed me that the alkalinity, the calcium, the magnesium, the macro elements are so similar to the outer reef, but what is in the water is like what I used to explain to people. The reef starts a couple of, maybe 1,000 kilometers inland, because when we get our rainfall here on the Great Barrier Reef, when it rains inland, that water running off into the ocean, like what I say to people, where does magnesium come from? Where does calcium come from? Where does these macro elements come? Where does lithium come from? It's an ore. It's a mineral that lives on the land. It's in the dirt. So when we get that dirty water running off, and what do the mangroves do? Well, the mangroves are a filtering system. It's the ocean floor is the denitrification filter. The mangroves are a denitrification filter. It's all about the massive ecological system. And, I've got to say, guys, I've had a bad morning, and I'm using my phone. Apologies, but my battery's about to go flat. My phone charger's in my bag, so I'm at 20%. But if I cut out, I do apologise. But
you can go ahead and
look,
get your battery
when,
charger, Nick, if you want to just scooch off for a minute.
oh
and get your
no,
battery.
it's I've borrowed my girlfriend's car and getting tyres put on a car 30 minutes away from my car, where my
Uh-oh.
super. Yeah, I know. Yeah, sorry guys, but anyway, like, to talk a little bit about the LPS. Again, that's a much more extensive process. It is so much more than aquapora. You can be a little bit more tolerant with the collection process, but when we bring them in, I had 3 incoming coral systems. So the corals would firstly come into a system where they would sit, and then we would pull them out. Then we would cut them with saws. We would cut the bases off, minimizing the bone structure that I'm exporting. I don't want to export Chris a bunch of rock, because that's number one. He wants the coral. I'm not going to send him like a massive rock underneath, and at that period of time, you're also going to, make sure that you cut the coral so that when I put it into my system, that it's not leaning on the side. It's not having that photosynthetic component changed. That it's facing up the right way. It's easy to feed. It's easy to put into the bag. It's easy for transit. We all know what everyone does with their coral. Once it gets to a supplier, it gets chopped up. So minimizing the bone on the corals, that's number one. So, and then we used to have these dipping systems. So the corals would be dipped into this solution first, and then we would have a secondary solution that we would dip. The water that we would use when we're using the cutting saws would have another solution in it. We would then use little tweezers, toothbrushes. I think my local supermarket used to potentially think that that I was probably the biggest toothbrush buyer in Australia. We used to go through a lot of toothbrushes, and we had to get the real stiff ones. So I used to go to my supermarket guy when he didn't have any and go, "Can I order a box of them?" He's like, "What are you doing with a box?" And these, we would put like tape a stainless steel screw to the end of the toothbrushes, because that was really good to get in between the corals and pull the tunicates out and all the bits and pieces out. Having the little ribs on the screws was really good to, sometimes twist in and get those, the boring shells out of the, and the LPS was crazy, because after we did that cutting and cleaning and touching, and scrubbing and making sure everything was clean, it would then go into the second incoming coral system, and that's where they would sit for a week. And then there was a very strict process. So, you know, you got to minimize the water that you transfer between systems. You got to minimize any stuff that's on those corals. So then we would have an approval a system that for the corals to move from secondary incoming coral system to number 3, you know, no photos are taken, nothing sold out of these systems. It is, you know, they could die, you know, you could have, you know, so I don't want to go and put a picture up of a coral that could potentially, a customer's like, I've got to have that. But I'm like, no, because you could die. You know, there is, like, when we start talking about DOA rates on stuff out of the ocean, this is what I've done to minimize that, to ensure the health of the animal. So that system, you know, the corals are kept the same as the main systems, same parameters. The food is then added. So I find that LPS corals definitely go through a transition period. They get a bit of a shock because they've gone from a really crappy environment sometimes, but then it takes them a little while for them to realize, hey, this is the Versace hotel that I've just arrived at, and they serve good meals here, and I really like this place. But they do, you know, like I used to explain to my staff. I said, if I go and pick you up, and say if you're an Australian, and I just go and, like, you're going to America now, and you're going to move to America, and, you know, what are you going to be like? You know, you're going to be flustered. You're going to be a little out of your comfort zone. You're going to be a little bit, oh, I don't know if I like this place. You know, but if you give them the appropriate, you know, you give them everything they need to settle into the new home, they respond and they go, this is great. And they get brighter and they are healthier and they maintain themselves, but you must allow that transitional process. You must allow them the time. So that's why my rules were minimum 1 month, because 2 to 3 weeks is what an LPS coral, you know, pachyceptors, what they require to then, and you see them respond because they thank you for it by going, I'm healthy. They bounce off the flesh. They get brighter. The colors become vibrant. Sorry, Dom.
So the Nick, the food that you feed them after the collection, is that some secret recipe or is something that can?
I could share with you. It's not a secret. There's no secret. It's about getting scientists, and it's about learning. I hired a scientist that specialised in food for fish nutrition, and then we obviously did ICP tests. I did more scientific analysis upon before my business crumbled. I was doing DNA on bacteria that lived within the different environments that I collected coral from. I was looking at DNA of bacteria that lived in my system. I was looking at how that correlates with the coral and what bacteria might actually live within the coral. So when you start looking at that component, you've got to think, well, what's that bacteria eating too? Because if the bacteria is healthy that lives within the coral, you know, it's about a symbiotic relationship. That reef is a system, and if you don't try and replicate that system, you're making that move for that coral out of the ocean into an aquarium. You're shocking it, and it makes it harder for it to transition to the new place. And if there's something not right, like a toxic algae in your tank, or a bloom or an outbreak of anything, you know, that is a sign of an imbalance in that system of equilibrium of coral. And you've also got to look at your system size. You know, if you go and jam a heap of corals into a system that's not capable of providing the appropriate nutrients, the appropriate food, and then you put this food in and you then cause ammonia spikes, nitrate spikes, you're stressing the coral out. Like, you've got to learn so I had rules on the volumetric measurement of what a coral should have. Like, you could basically put a cube around a coral, and that volume of water is what's required to house that coral and to give it its nutrients, its food, its light, water flow. If you don't have enough water, you can't get your dynamics of your water right. And if you're not getting all of those components right, you can fail, and your corals will be unhealthy. They won't respond. They will go down in health. You'll get diseases. Then they're susceptible for diseases. Now, like us, a healthy human does not get sick. An unhealthy human gets sick. So why is it different for a coral? They're an animal on the planet like us. So, this is the depth that I went into to ensure that my corals were healthy and happy.
Hey, Nick, to follow up on Dong's question, for hobbyists out there watching that make their own do-it-yourself coral and fish food, do you have any specific ingredients that they might want to consider adding to that coral and fish food?
Well, look inwards. Back in the day before any of these nutrients were available, I used to be a bit outlandish, and I used to use, how in the morning you're not feeling right and you get a Barocca tablet, and you take a Barocca in the morning and it peps you up and gives you a bit of the nutrients you need. I used to add Barocca to my system. I used to.
What's Barocca?
Yeah, what is Barocca?
It's a tablet. It's like, it's got nutrients and amino acids, minerals.
Must be an Aussie thing.
Is it like a water vitamin?
Vitamins, minerals, everything that you need to survive. My coral food, Bill, we can probably catch up, mate, and I'll share my ingredients with you. It's not that extensive, and for me, it's about everyone learning about how to really truly look after their corals properly. I'll send you it. There's a wet component, there's a dry component, but there's also a dry component. But all in all, in the end, if we can all keep our corals in good nick, we're all having happy, healthy corals. We're fragging them, we're sharing them. There's a few things that I was working on, which was building the world's biggest live coral bank. Which is, ensuring that, what I started doing was, I think Salem sort of taking over from sort of where I left off with my coral arc, which is, there's so many people around the world that would love to help our reefs. Having a library of all the corals that are in captivity right now, and learning my spawning specialty was learning about how we could basically. I've spent a lot of my years pulling stuff out of the ocean and making a profit from it. So this was my give back to the world, to the industry, that we could create a live library of corals held within people's aquariums. But it's also about getting a platform where we get all of our information from everyone, and we share it, and we all benefit from it. So yeah, absolutely. Let's get that done. So food is just one part.
Before your battery.
Food only work. Chris will tell you about this too. Food will only work if you have the appropriate skimming, the appropriate denitrification filters, the water flow, distribution. Look at the ocean. Everyone says to me, used to come and see me, have I got enough flow in my aquarium? And I said, no, you never do.
Never did.
You never do. You never will. To replicate the ocean, to replicate those systems, it's huge. It's huge. And a square box does not give the fluid dynamics that the ocean can give. But we do our best, and people like Chris, I call him my brother from another mother, because we talk about this stuff, and we excel for
Feed
the
off each
passion,
other.
for the love of the coral. Yeah.
Well,
But Chris, you can pipe in now and share your bit.
I was gonna say before your phone dies, let's talk about the the coral bank. Okay, and the industry gets a lot of flack for taking corals from the reef, and if we aren't able to take those corals from the reef to get a coral bank going, then it's going to be forgotten about, just like the Florida Keys was nearly forgotten about for a decade and a half, 2 decades. And now that, we got Kerry O'Neill doing the coral spawning, there's a lot of, and there's a Florida Reef track in general, there's a lot of emphasis coming back to what happened to the reefs and how they're going to try to save them. But my point being is, we cannot get that coral bank if we don't have exports from Australia, if we don't have exports from Indonesia and from other places where we can legally obtain corals with CITES permits. And I think it's extremely important that, a country like Australia that's looking, the industry is getting a lot of flack, and the chances of it surviving long term is very slim, even though the reef still has plenty to offer to the land-based aquarium without destroying the reef. I mean, the small amount of coral that's removed from the reef is minimal compared to what lives on the reef. And then Nic can tell you straight up that the most of the coral that he swims past when he's diving is not something that's desirable for the aquarium trade. And probably 80 to 90% of it, if not closer to 99% of it, isn't something that we would want. So us being able to obtain these animals from the wild and keep them and bank them and spawn them down the road to keep their diversity in captivity going is not going to be the detriment to the reef. It's the human impact that we all know about that, gets pushed aside. But the little guys like us that want to educate people on the reef and continue to export corals, and I can continue to import corals, are the ones that get shut down first. Because we don't have the money to, to fight it all. But the bottom line with, what he was saying, I think it's important, something I've always wanted to do too, is to have a bank of corals so big that, we can then take those animals and we can spawn them and we can make more genetic diversity over time. And the fact that we've got a little bit of experience with spawning corals and settling them and growing them out is a bonus. It's not easy to do. It's not cheap to do. But without wild collection and export from these countries, we don't have an industry. We don't, it will eventually die to the point of, it'll be stagnant to the point where nobody want to get into it, because how many times can you fragment a particular coral? I can tell you for a fact, we had at one point 37 different colors and species of monopora growing on the farm. Well, I've reduced that amount tremendously because there's no demand for Montes anymore. And I grow them so much faster than I can actually sell them, that we've really depleted the amount of Montes that are in our facility, because they grow fast, they take up a lot of space, but they still need to be there, because over time, maybe they'll become popular again. I'm sure they will. Everything goes in cycles. It's cyclical, but we need to have exports and we need to be able to import. And I worry about the import side on my end with, and I don't want to go political, but politicians can easily be swayed to shut down something that doesn't need to be shut down because they aren't given the proper facts. And same thing with the export from Australia and the collection from Australia, that can be shut down easily too. And we're at the mercy of, the money. When you break it all down, the money is going to talk, and, the reality and the facts are going to walk, and we can't fix that.
When you say the money is going to talk, Chris, what do you mean?
Well, the money's going to talk, whether it's the truth or whether it's a lie. And a matter of whether or not people believe the truth or they believe the lie is what's going to be the problem. So when you have a lot of lies that are being put out there about coral collection, and I'm sure Nic's seen and heard plenty of it. He's been to plenty of meetings in Australia, and I haven't been. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when he was up there screaming and hollering at these people, saying that you don't know what you're talking about because you have never been on the reef. You probably haven't even been on a boat in your entire life, but you're trying to tell me that that you're going to shut down my coral industry when you've never even seen what the reefs look like. It's just like the documentary Chasing Corals. Talking about all the dead corals on those Heron Island and all those reefs, but they didn't come back and do another documentary telling you the truth about what really happened 5 years later, and there was more coral diversity ever found on the reef in the history of the reef. That's the problem. Education.
One of the biggest and scariest things that I've noticed over the years, because I started up UCA research because I went to James Cook University and I asked them, what do you know about Scalemia australis? What do you know about Homophilius? You know, what do you know about all these corals that we collect? And they knew nothing. And it blew me away. But then it took me a long time because I had to learn about science. And science is a business. And when you're taking the people's money, it comes with rules, you know. So why are the corals in our industry in Australia not being, you know, not been researched? Because there's no outcome for the for the Australian people. So this is why I started up Corallark, because I listened to you guys around the world, and there's so many aquarists that have corals that have more of a passion for coral and coral reefs than the people that live directly in front of the Great Barrier Reef. What blows me away is the amount of people that live in front of the Great Barrier Reef but have never been there. But they're an advocate against collecting corals. You know, they're and you know, it's like we have this wonderful, massive network of people that are so knowledgeable. Don't like Chris, Keith, you know, you guys have all got something to share to science. You know, my Corallark was about providing a platform where you put your tank on. I was about to build the world's first molecular testing pack and teach everyone how that they can contribute to the pool. My Corallark was about providing a platform for everyone in the aquarium industry to go, you know, in the nicest possible way, give the government the bird, give science the bird, and we as a global industry can put in place the necessary research. You don't have to be a scientist to do research. Like I'm one of a couple of people that specializes in coral spawning that's not a scientist. And how do they learn this? Like you guys learn. You know, we're all the same. We're all the same skin. You know, it's about providing a platform where we can all not be named and shamed about what degree you have, but you have knowledge, and that knowledge needs to be put into a platform for everyone to benefit. So my facility that I've lost was about providing a space for people like yourself to come along and stay, share their information, but learning how to spawn and reproduce every single species on this planet, provide a space where we can hold the corals that people don't want in their aquarium, but also learn how to reacclimate corals and put them back into different ocean environments. You know, my Corallark was about talking to divers and making them scientists to start collecting ICP samples, you know, tissue samples, starting to recognize where different corals and the same corals live in different environments around the world. Start building basically what I used to say is the Wikipedia of corals. Not only, you know, this was my book that I would hand to my kids to say, look, you know, we did some damage, but, you know, here's the book on how we can repopulate the oceans. This is how we can fix it. And this is the code of conduct. This is the information. This is where they used to live. This is where we found this coral. And, you know, this is how you reproduce it. You know, I was working on, like, you know, four new spawning methods that no one's even heard of, no one's thought of, because, you know, I see that there is a future for this industry in spawning. And you know, I was one of the only ones that was working on spawning, you know, Scalemia and Bowerbankies and whatnot. You know, I love my Bowerbankies and Scullies. They and you know, there's a sad story there, but we won't go into that. But you know, I haven't dived for a few years. My battery's almost about to go flat. But you know, there's plenty of time for us to come back to more information on this. But and I'd love to share my experiences and what I've learned. It's about, and this is what I love about you guys, everyone in the industry. You guys have given me the inspiration, Chris. Dong, yeah, Keith, but everyone new, you know, to this industry. You know, the more people that get aquariums, but you know what really peed me off about Australia and Australian coral collectors is the secretism, the money, and then the battle for the price. You know, the cost of getting coral here in Australia has not gone down, but the price of coral has gone down. What I love about America and Europe is you guys work together. You know, the prices are, you know, pretty damn good and maintained. You guys are very respectful of each other and the costs of doing what you do. It's been quite inspirational traveling the world, going to coral shows. It's something that I made a lot of time for, is to talk to aquarists, to talk to wholesalers, to learn, to grow. So, the exportation and the way that I did it was, if I could have done it for free, I would love to do it for free, because I just love it. 35 years of being involved with the ocean, I'm still learning so much, and it is just amazing. And I will never stop learning until I die.
That's awesome. Hey, Dong, I know you had a bunch of
Yeah.
questions. I don't know if you want to throw one in there to Nick before we lose him.
Oh, okay. So, you mentioned that you did ICP test on a different area of the reef. So, how different are they?
Not much different. They are different.
So they're
and
basically the same.
Yeah, there is slight differences. It's when you look into the macro and micro elements that change. So you may find, so what I found was that, so I was starting to do research into coral coloration, and why do I only find, this, why do I only find Lords in, why do I find this coloration, color morph here, and I don't find it anywhere else? Why do I find this coloration here and nowhere else? So I started investigating that. I started looking into the different clades of zooanthally, but the ICP test is just a component of the importance. The next part, which I'm really stoked that Salem is working on, is the bacteria. We're full of bacteria. Our stomachs are full of bacteria. We're made of bacteria. It's a very key component of how that coloration of the coral, the correlation between the nutrients, the bacteria, of how corals will react and how they will uptake different nutrients, how they will, bring on more magnesium, or, like gonioporas, we've found success with, increasing one type of nutrient, like
Vanadium.
That's right. Like, it's a, yeah, that's right.
Just a little boost in manganese and vanadium. I mean, that was one of the things we had a problem with in our wild systems, was gonnies would come in looking for spectacular, and over weeks, 2 weeks, 3 week period of time, they wouldn't be as happy. And when we started playing, and Keith remembers when I started playing with minor and trace elements, because now he does too. But the vanadium, the manganese, and the cobalt, and of course iron, were huge components of the reason why the gonnies weren't as happy. And so I'm getting what you're saying. So different reefs that had same species have different minor elements as well as different nutrients, which is part of the reason why you're getting different color variants in areas where you don't have the same color variant coming from the other areas.
Right.
Which is, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, and it's like Solomon Island corals. I've seen, a Cinerina coming from the Solomon Islands is damn near clear, and you can see right through it. And I did an ICP test on the water from the Solomon Islands, and believe it or not, the manganese level was like 5,000 times higher than everywhere else in the world. The iron level was massive amounts higher than everywhere else in the world. So was vanadium. So was a lot of your minor elements. But then again, I thought about it. What is Solomon? It's a volcanic island where all that stuff's coming to the surface. It's all coming.
What is Indonesia?
Exactly.
What is Indonesia?
You're exactly
17,000 islands. When you start talking about genetic diversity, genetic manipulation naturally, you start talking about nutrient distribution, you start talking about currents, you start talking about oxygen levels. They have good weather a lot of the time. So you've got to remember that the carbonate exchange through the surface of the water is very important. You've got to remember, how does oxygen get into the water? Well, the algae, so different levels of algae in different environments create different oxygen environments. When you put oxygen, it's an oxidizer. Then you've got the sun, it gets huge. And, and this is why the platform that I was making was about bringing this together, because, it needs all of us in the industry to work together to be able to, start putting these massive amounts of correlations between nutrients to ICP tests to zone valley clades to bacteria to the sun to oxygen. It's huge. It's huge, and it's something that the entire world
how
needs to
deep
be
are the
involved.
aquapora you collected from the reef? Normally, the how deep in the water they are?
Well, it depends on the species. You've got deep water aquapora, then you've got microcladis that will grow in the deeper water and in the shallow water. But you can. It's also about knowing the different species and the different environments that they like. I find so, for example, strawberry shortcake. I had rules. So if I were a strawberry shortcake, I like to be in an environment where I'm at low tide, I'm getting smashed by waves. At high tide, I'm a couple of meters under the water, and they love
That's
sunlight.
shallow.
That's shallow. That's right.
Yeah.
So, but when
Wow.
you talk about anthocercis, they like to be in high current. They like to be on an exposed section of reef. They like because they build very big solid bones, so they need to make sure that they have, and then this is when we start talking about water flow. How does that coral get that heavy and thick bone? Distribution of nutrients, so they like water flow. So there's certain reefs that I go to where I cannot dive them until the outgoing tide, because when the water goes around the reef, they get a relax in the tide, but you're also creating a back eddy. There's a back eddy on the backside of the reef. Now that back eddy creates an environment where nutrients drop, food drops, spawn drops. So you're creating so it's about creating that environment as well.
So having
So
dynamic flow in your tank is ideal. And you can use wave pumps all you want, but if you don't have it on an oscillator, you're not going to get dynamic flow. And have multiple oscillators, you're not going to have that dynamic
Correct.
flow. There's no way to produce dynamic flow unless you're moving multiple power heads at 180 degrees at different speeds, so that it flows never the same.
Oh,
So this is
that
why I
oscillator
know.
makes a huge difference.
Big
Yes.
time.
For my
Yes.
SPS.
The growth of the
for my
corals
acro.
has changed in
Yes.
my system just with the oscillators on there. Like there are certain, like the ancestor and I can never pronounce it. The orange anthoceras and that you sent me, Nick.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was
yeah.
growing all spindly and weird, and the table didn't look right. And it's so funny because when the oscillator was put on and it started getting dynamic flow, it started growing perfect, like a table is supposed to grow, not all spindly and just branchy and thin. And it was like, holy cow, this thing is much more robust, but now it's growing slower.
There's a unique ability. There was a unique ability that
French,
I
right?
there was a unique ability that I grew, which was it might sound silly to some people, but if I were, imagine if I were a certain coral, what do I want? What do I need? For example, Homophilia baobanki. They live, why was I so good at finding them? Because I worked out where they like to live. Now, it has blown me away that a planula larvae, a swimming egg, can go looking for a specific environment. It can go looking for what it likes. And then where it attaches and grows, I'm like, how the hell did you hold on to that little environment? So certain species of coral love to be smashed, but that's how they get their oxygen and that's how they get their light. So some aquaporas love shallow water and they respond, but you put a microcladis down in the deep and it just does this weird thing. It just doesn't look right.
It turns brown.
But that's right.
So
and it
for
loses
the
its
deep
color.
water acro, how deep are we talking about?
Well, I get
Where'd you collect your
aquapora.
echinatas? You were going like 120 feet, weren't you?
Yep.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
a huge
there's
difference.
rules. There's rules. And then when you find them and not in that depth and in shallower water, they are in a cave. They've found a spot where they can replicate the depth, where they're only getting sunlight for a period of the day because they're behind a big bommy. You know, they're only getting light for two-thirds of the day. They're not getting light, and that's why it was growing there. You know, it went, oh, I found the right spot. You know, but you know, we haven't even done testing or scientific analysis on corals that, you know, that die because they aren't in the right environment. You know, there's so much more research that needs to be done. That's what really gave me excitement, was really getting into the depth of where corals live, you know, how they live and how the hell they find their way to those spots. You know, what has devastated me in Australia is the money component for the corals. And my biggest concern right now is the genetic diversity in nature has been taken. We have reduced the coral's natural ability to create an industry in the future. But also, you know, from some of the study work and the documents that I put forth to the industry, which got ignored because of the money, because of the need to make money, the need to make a profit, was that we've probably set the natural ability for the ocean to respond to make homophilias back to the way they were when I first started collecting them in huge numbers and huge sizes. But we've taken away that genetic diversity. We've taken away those hotspots, the back eddies, where they should have been left alone. We looked at them and went, oh my God, bang, 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 thousands of them. But what we should have left them, because that was where genetic diversity happened. That was when mass spawning events was needed for that sperm and egg to mix and then to get distributed elsewhere. That's what we needed as an industry to ensure that we have an industry into the future. But unfortunately, those things have been taken. And where you know, scalemias live is not a big area at all. And I can say that in the period of time that I've dived the regions where they live, we no longer will you go out and get 2,000 pieces in a day. You'd be lucky to get 20 or 30. Yeah, but
Wow,
what we've
that little?
Well, desirable ones,
Oh,
Donald.
okay.
yes, correct.
There's tens of thousands or millions or whatever you want to say of the gray and the ugly. What Nick is talking about when he's saying genetic diversity has been taken is a lot of the premium color morphs that would want to be in captivity are the ones that were taken.
Yes, correct. Yep. So what we've done is we've reset the genetic diversity back to zero. Well, not zero, but you know, we've made a hindrance in that you know, it is going to take a long time, more than my lifetime, any of our lifetimes, to be able to see that you know, that population come back to a state of where it can do what it did at the start. So, but good news is I'm working on a project that will see the industry get those corals back, and then some, and give the industry the shove and the push that it needs to have a future sustainably. And you know, I've quietly been working on spawning, automatic spawning tanks, commercialization of spawning of coral. I've been working on for about 12 plus years. And that is no easy task. And but I have a system that I've created, and I've still got quite some time to fine tune that, test it, and then fund it. So
Yeah.
you know, as you all know, with farming coral, there's a period of time that you need to fund, you know, very expensive systems to run, and very, very expensive everything to be able to have it, you know, grow for many, many years to be able to get that genetic diversity. But it's good because Chris, you know, and we see a future for the industry. We see, and that's what gives me my passion. You know, that's what gives me my drive to keep moving in that area. You know, we must have wild collection though. We must have the industry you know, we must have wild collection from the ocean. It's very important that we do this. But the coral arc in the industry, you know, you guys secretly don't know that you are all a part of the land-based library. You know, we put seeds in the mountains. We preserve every plant. But who the hell is, you know, putting away every coral species? You know, we are. But we just don't know it. And
So
it's pretty
is there
cool.
a program in US like the Coral Arc?
Yes, that was one of my sales guys that gave it to, I think, SDC. And yeah, but are they active with it? Are they doing, you know, the system, the Coral Arc that I was getting going was very unique. It's quite unique in what it was doing. It was more about you guys. It was more about empowering you guys. It's more about empowering Chris, you know, and the home Aquarius to be a part of it. It was more about it's not about the money. It's about everyone having a go at sharing their knowledge and building the right information for everyone to use to ensure that we all have this hobby. I want my kids to see this hobby. I want my kids' kids to see this hobby. And if we do have problems in the ocean, can you imagine if all of us, the Aquarius, got together and we all contributed to growing corals and putting some back in the ocean? We'd do a better job than science. We'd do a better job than what government could ever do.
Hey, Nick, and even Chris, is in terms of the diversity issue, is that a common thing? I mean, do collectors, you know, go for pick of the litter, cream of the crop, the cherry pieces, and kind of leave the blah stuff behind? I mean, is there no regulations for that sort of thing in terms of coral collecting?
No, there is no regulations for it. And honestly, if they were put in where they had to take equal amounts of gray and brown to the colorful, I don't think anybody would do it because they wouldn't be able to make any money on the stuff that's gray and brown because nobody would want it for their aquarium. I mean, I love gray and brown corals depending on the species. There's so many really cool color morphs that are not desirable.
Right?
The shape of the coral, you know, all of that is a factor for me. I don't like just the most vibrant, colorful corals that are out there. I mean, if I was on a reef diving with Nick, I'd be plucking a piece of this and plucking a piece of that. And he'd be like, why? I'm like, because I want it. Not because anybody else is ever going to want it. It's because it's a cool piece of coral. It's all about all corals, not just the vibrant and colorful. And honestly, that's the thing I think is the biggest misconception about the coral collecting itself. I mentioned it earlier, 90% of what lives in the ocean isn't desirable for the aquarium trade. So we cannot destroy the reefs to the point of no return by collecting corals from them. What we can do is what Nick was saying is mess with the genetic diversity that's out there. But you also have to take into consideration too, Nick, when you're talking about that, every gray and brown coral that we don't want carries that recessive gene for that master scolie. So you can take master scolies and spawn them together and have two master scolies, spawn them, put them in a system, and you're going to get more gray and brown corals out of it than you are colorful ones.
But also, you know, don't take what I have said as a negative, right? So
no, not at all.
You've got to remember that we are all human. This is how we roll. Evolution is a factor that we, you know, there is two things on the planet in my world that are certain. We're going to die someday, and evolution. You know, so, you know, we can't go and get shitty upon what we've done by picking out the nice corals. You know, it is the human nature. It is everything. You know, look at the bird life. Look at look at birds and how they work. You know, the female bird looks for the best looking male. You know, the crocodile looks for the sexiest female. You know, it is nature what we do. But what I'm saying is that we can fix this. We can make this better. We can do what we need to do as an industry. But it's really cool because, you know, the next, you know, platform that we provide, we'll be able to put stuff back in the ocean eventually. and we'll be able to fix it. But you got to remember, it's human nature what we do. Like I used to say to my divers when I was training them, I would say, okay, I'm going to put like a, I have to be careful here, I'm going to put a 1964 Chevy Nova with a 450. I'm going to put a Ferrari and a Lamborghini, and then I'm going to put what's one of your cheap cars over there?
Pinto.
Pinto.
Yeah, Volkswagen Beetle. All right, I'm going to put them out for you. Okay, I want you to pick which car you're going to take. Do I need to say any more?
Yeah.
No one's going for the Beetle.
Yeah.
So let's not beat around the bush. We're only doing what we're doing as humans, But the cool part is like Chris says, there is gene components, and this genetic work is only brand new for the coral industry. Names are being changed at the moment, where everything's being thrown up in the air. I'm excited to see the new coral books that are going to come out in the next 10 to 20 years. Once we start getting this stuff. And then, what does that lead into? Well, that leads into a new industry of like, wow, what can we produce from spawning and, manipulation of different corals, different spawning. Like, I'm excited to, I'm 48 this year. Like, by the time I'm 50, 60, who knows? We're going to have some stuff that's going to be amazing.
Well, think about what they did with like breeding saltwater fish in captivity. I mean, look at clownfish. I mean, a Procula clown and an Ocellaris clown where, everybody loved them. And now there's 50 different color variants of them because they selectively bred them. And imagine what we can do with corals if we can actually break that, figure out how to do it on a mass scale, manipulate them to spawn when we want them to spawn, not when the lunar cycle tells them to spawn. And it's going to be really, really cool when we can actually do this and do it right. I mean, right now, I did it. My wife and I did it. It was very expensive. It was very time consuming. And we need a whole entire crew of people to do it if we're going to do it right. But, there's so much that spawning corals in captivity is going to be able to do for the industry itself. To bring even more awareness of what lives under the ocean. I mean, that's, I think, the most important part of exporting and importing is the fact that without it, there's no awareness of actually what lives halfway around the world. And that is the single most important component of the industry, but nobody talks about it. I mean, without the industry, the awareness of what lives under the ocean, under the water, is not even thought about. I mean, I talk to people all the time and they ask me what I do for a living. I say, I'm a coral farmer. I'm a coral geek. And they, what are you talking about? What do you mean coral? Stuff that lives on the coral reefs and the Great Barrier Reef in Indonesia, and they look at me like I'm crazy, but it's because there's not enough taught about it in school. And
I agree.
We are the pioneers, us that talk about coral reefs, Nick, Keith and Dong, we talk about it every day of our lives. And, I educate people as much as I possibly can. And if there's one person that I find in a day that never saw and has no idea what a coral reef, what a coral is that we have in an aquarium, and I explain it to them and I teach that one person, well, then it's in the back of their head, and we need more of that. And being able to import has been I'm sure a lot of people have followed me and have learned a lot from what we've done and what we've, seen, as coral enthusiasts. And we have to be able to continue to collect corals from our reefs. Nick has to be able to continue to export them. I have to be able to continue to import them, because as of now, that's the only way genetic diversity comes into the industry. And it's we're 10 years from coral spawning being something that's done, commercially. We might even be farther than 10 years away from that because of the expenses that are involved. I'm right there with you, dude. I'm saying that because I'm trying to be a realist about it, because I know what you want to do. I know what I want to do. And it's still a pipe dream. Is it going to happen? I think it will, because it will. Usually if I put my mind to it, it happens. I mean,
It will.
18 years ago,
It
people
will.
told me I was nuts for doing what I'm doing and I'm going to fail. And I proved them all wrong. So you know what? We're going to spawn corals. People say I'm not going to do it. Come see me in 10 years.
So
Yep.
the
Within
company
the
in
next 10
Germany,
years,
they,
it's going to be exciting.
Yes.
yeah, the
Sorry.
company in Germany, they're already selling the first batch of the spawning coral, acro.
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
correct.
Is it Dijon?
Let's not
Who?
even talk about aquapora. Like when it comes to spawning aquapora, like you can do it accidentally. You can do it so easily. Let's not talk about that. The
I did it
genetic. Yeah, correct.
without a
Anyone can
lunar
do it.
cycle or
Like
anything. That's why I think it's gravitational pull. But the
Mhm.
scientists that are doing it don't want to hear me.
Yeah, actually, the
It's okay.
I see some papers saying that it's not really about the moonlight, it's about the darkness. Yeah, maybe it's gravitational pull, but they're proven that so I just read several papers saying that it's really not the moonlight.
But you know,
yes, dog.
if it's not the
Dog.
It's more
moonlight,
like
then why
seasonal
is
or
it?
something.
If it's not the moonlight, if that's not a contributing factor, then why is it that when you put in Apex over your system and you have it simulate the lunar cycle of the region where the coral comes from, that the coral goes into its you know, production of eggs and sperm and actually does spawn? But then you have like my coral system that's at my farm that's never seen a lunar cycle, never seen lunar light, and I've got coral fragments that were this big turned into colonies this big that spawned and have never had, you know, a lunar light over top of them. But they
That's
spawned
exactly
at the
the
same
experiment
time.
shows. Yeah, that's what exactly those people did the experiment. It shows that the coral doesn't even see the moonlight, doesn't on those apex, they spawn.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Yes,
The Campophilia at
correct.
120 feet of water, how are they seeing any of that lunar light hitting down that deep? I don't think they are at 120 feet of water. So they're probably feeling the gravitational pull of the lunar cycle, and that's what's triggering them to go off. But they're really
There's
weird.
something I said at the start of this video that, you know, one of the skills that I have that I am very grateful for is I have a very good skill to simplify things. You know, I said something at the start of this video that a lot of people miss. You know, what is a coral? You know, the one thing I can tell you that a lot of people go and get too technical, they get too far into it. What do corals do? They eat food and they reproduce.
Yes. Yeah.
And they create nutrients. They are that simple. That's the thing too, is everybody makes them out to be really complicated, and you know, they're really simple. It's just a matter of, like Nic's been talking about this, you know, a lot, you just got to keep your parameters or keep your stability in your system, and you can grow corals really long term. I mean, I don't even know. I've got corals that are on my farm that have been proven lineage for 30 plus years, and they're growing. You know, I think they just found the biggest coral colony in the world, which is in Australia now. I forget how big it actually is. I was watching.
Seen that.
But how many years old is that? How they found a piece in the Solomon Islands that was, you know, in like 80 feet of water, and it's so massive. They drilled a hole with a boring saw through it, and they figure it's 10,000 years old. Wow. You know, they're simple.
You know, there's the other thing that people also forget too. You know, like the Great Barrier Reef is 13 million years old. You know, guys, all of your lives, my kids' lives, my grandkids' lives, you know, my granddad, my great-granddad, my great-great-granddad, you know, to measure what I say to people, to measure our penetration, our time and existence in seeing the reef, get your fingers, squeeze it together as tight as you can, and that's still nothing of what the 13 million years is. You know, so you've got to take that into consideration. What we're here visualizing on these reefs is minuscule. It is nothing compared to the 13 million years. You know, so we need to remember that as well. So it's been here longer than us, and it will be here beyond us on this planet, I think.
Your video is starting to die, Nic.
Huh?
Your video is starting to die. We can hear you talk, but your video is not working so well. You must be about dead, aren't you?
Yeah. I think
Yeah, you've lasted a lot longer than I thought.
I can't
exactly.
believe my I'm on 1%, guys.
All right, well,
Let's see if we could suck another 15 minutes out of that 1%.
It's
So
amazing.
can I ask a
isn't
question real quick before
Yep.
your battery run out? So what do you use to dip your coral?
it? In many different things.
Dettol.
Dettol is one of them. The other one was I've been out of it for a couple of years, guys, and been doing other stuff for a bit. Dong, let's make contact. I'll take you through the whole lot. I had scientists.
Okay.
And I could post the food and the dipping regime in the comments here once we get all that
Perfect.
stuff.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. Sounds good. All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna sign off because it is 1%.
Okay.
I do need to go and find a charger somewhere. And pick up my girlfriend's car. So
Thanks for coming on, Nick.
Hey, Nick, man, thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
on. We really appreciate it. Chris,
No
man, you want to
worries.
hang on for a few minutes?
Of course, I'll go, you know me. I'll go for hours.
Yeah, well, me too. Me too. I will get better set up next time. All right. So, all right. Thanks for your time, guys. I really
Appreciate
really
you,
appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Nick, man.
All right.
Thank
See you guys.
Thank you.
All right,
Later.
take care.
Okay. Bye.
Hey,
So-
so Chris, I wanted to there was a couple of viewer questions that we didn't get a chance to address, and this one I thought was an interesting one. I don't know if you can see that comment and make a comment on it, but basically it's about the distribution network and the role they're playing in terms of getting the livestock, to the aquarius via the local fish store. I mean, how has that relationship been the last couple of years?
Well, what from distribution, that's the key to ACI success, is making sure we deal with the right people. And dealing with the right people doesn't always come as cheap as, what it could be. So we don't buy by price, we buy by quality. A lot of places will buy by the cheapest price they can get the corals. And of course you get what you pay for. You don't get somebody that cares about the corals. I can tell you for a fact that, not as much so now in Australia, now that my main supplier, you guys have had Don on here before, Don Gilson from Interfish. He's retired, but I
don't think I've ever had him on.
Oh, you never had him on?
No. I don't think so.
Him and Lou?
Nope.
Okay.
No.
I thought you did.
No.
And it must have been another platform that I had him on with. But I mean, they were just like me, and and I had conversations with them. I've got some suppliers that I deal with that they do a good job, but when you see one shipment from that supplier versus a supplier I've been using for 15 years that we've been collaborating on different ways to make things better, you can see a huge difference in the animals when they arrive. It's not necessarily a major issue with a supplier that I don't talk to on a regular basis, and I know doesn't do the cleaning that my other guys do, or dipping or whatever. We just end up having to do it here ourselves. So from distribution to somebody like me that wholesales it, then to the LFS, then to the aquarist, you have to understand that everybody in this hobby is in it to make money. And a lot of people will say what they want you to hear, but maybe don't do it. I'm not pointing out anybody particular, but it's a common practice. And it makes me sad, to be honest with you, because when we do everything we need to do to ensure the healthiest possible corals are being shipped to our customers, and our suppliers are doing exactly the same thing, and then it ends up we're too expensive because this guy is transshipping it because there's no real care done for the animals, and they get it. Well, it looks just as good, but looks can be deceiving when you first receive a coral. I mean, I've seen corals be wide open and happy and healthy, and 3 days later, what happened to it? how the animals are cared for from the time they're in the export facility to the time they get to my facility is extremely important, in my opinion. There's places that do it right, and there's places, in my opinion, that don't do it right. It is what it is. You know, that's how it is in any industry. You got good guys, you got bad guys, and you got everything in between. So as a hobbyist, if somebody wants to know where to buy or what to buy or how to look for things that are, you know, possible issues, I'm going to go back to the Fimbriophilia ancora again. You know, if somebody buys, if somebody really wants a Fimbriophilia para ancora, a wall hammer, we have 50 or 60 of these things that are just absolutely stunning in our facility right now that nobody wants to buy. But when we do a blind order, I sneak one in every blind order. And then they yell at me. I say, why are you yelling at me? You sent me a wall hammer. Okay, what does it look like? I've never seen one open that much. Okay, then stop yelling at me and sell it to your customer because we took care of it first. It was healthy. Now you got it. Then the customer buys it. I've gotten messages from customers, PMs on Facebook going, I've tried everybody. I've tried wall hammers so many times and I've never been able to keep one alive. I got one that came from you, and I've had it for 6 months now. And I waited this long because I was expecting it to be dead, but it just continues to look better and better and better. They're no different than a branching hammer coral when it comes to how you maintain them and take care of them. The difference is you got a large polyp that is in a zigzaggy maze shape or just a solid wall that has a lot more areas to get damaged from the time it's pulled from the reef, shipped from that collection area to Jakarta or to Bali, then all that goes on with it, you know, being handled and maintained there, and then put back into a bag and shipped it halfway around the world. I mean, there's so many things that people have no idea about when it comes down to importing corals, and then the guys that export the corals. And that's what I was hoping we could really, you know, sink in with everybody here. You know, the cost of corals has not really gone up a whole lot when you break it down. Yeah, the premium stuff has definitely spiked in price from when I started importing, but that's just a given because the internet has come and now everybody's got, you know, these rainbow corals, and, you know, they put them up for $10,000, and this guy's over in Indonesia on an island, you know, that now has the internet, says, I collect those things. I'm now raising my price because of, you know, I used to get chalice corals and we'd land them for $16. I mean, $16. And then somebody made one famous. I'm not naming their name. It's called the Bubblegum Monster. Next thing you know, chalices went through the roof in price. Went from $16 landed to $65 landed. So that's $130 wholesale coral. Now they can be cheap. They can be expensive. They're all over the place. You know, the industry needs to understand that, you know, freight is a huge aspect of the reason why corals have been staying at a higher price than what they were. You know, some corals that I used to pay, you know, most there was a lot of corals when I first started importing that were $1 to $5. You know, we're talking 18 years ago. That was the cost. Plus then you added your freight to it, and you had a coral you could sell for $15, $18 wholesale, which was a $30, $40 coral in a retail store. You know, now before the coral even lands, we can figure out the cost of the freight, and each coral ends up costing us between, again, it depends on the region, depends on you know, how the coral's packed, and, you know, how big the bag is, and there's a lot of different factors, but it can be anywhere from $15 to $30 in freight just on one piece of coral. Wow. So before I can even add the cost of the coral that I pay my supplier for, it cost me $15 or up to $30. So that means if everybody knows how to do their math, I have to make money. That coral cost $30 wholesale before the cost of the coral was added into it. So you see now where people are complaining, and I hear it all the time, that corals are too expensive. Well, when, say, a coral that I pay, I'm not going to throw any species out or anything like that. Say I paid $25 for a particular coral, and that coral has got $30 in freight on it. That means that coral cost me $55, where I used to maybe sell that coral for $55 wholesale. Now that coral is $110 wholesale. Wow. It's all because of the freight cost. Boxes haven't gotten cheaper. Clearance costs haven't gotten cheaper. U.S. Fish and Wildlife costs haven't gotten cheaper. Everything just continues to go up in price. So I have to factor that in for every single piece of coral, So when you have a shipment that comes in, and of course the tariffs have something to do with that as well, even though they're not horrible from the regions that we buy from, and we don't pay the tariff on the freight or the boxes or the clearance fees and stuff. It's still on the animals. And when you break it down and you look at the invoice, you're like, well, I remember when the freight was like a 10th or a 5th of what the cost of the corals is. Now the freight is almost half as much as what the corals cost me. So if it's a $20,000 invoice, the freight's 10 grand, the corals cost 10 grand. That's a lot. So
that's not sustainable.
It isn't. And it's made it really difficult for the average hobbyist that doesn't have or isn't wealthy or doesn't have, I'm going to use a perfect example. Young people, like teenagers that have a family, they live in a family house that has there's 5 people, mom, dad, 3 kids. If they're not making $250,000 a year, daddy and mommy probably aren't buying them a reef tank to take care of, because you can't do a reef tank cheap. Well, you can, but the industry would tell you can't.
Yeah.
But you really should be looking at alternative ways if you want to do a reef aquarium and you're a kid and you're a teenager that doesn't have a job, that's still in high school. You can set up an aquarium. Do what I did. I set up a 20-gallon tank, had an undergravel filter on it and an aqua clear filter on the back with a T8 bulb. That was my first reef tank. And guess what? I was very successful. I learned how to maintain parameters in something so basic and simple that as I got more and more into it, I graduated to getting better equipment, better lights, a sump and water flow pumps, but the problem today is the people that are selling the gear, they want that sale. They want that quick buck, and they don't look at the long-term aspect of it. It's not the same as what it was when I was getting into reefing. My mentor said, don't spend a lot of money on a reef tank. Just do something basic and easy. Do water changes and maintain your, take care of your tank that way. You don't need to get all this fancy gear that's going to cost you, for a 75-gallon tank, you're going to have $8,000-$10,000 into it. You can buy that 75-gallon tank with a sump, with a small protein skimmer, and a T5 lamp from Home Depot, of all things. Go cheap. Do it right. Learn how to take care of it. Don't blow a ton of money on your system if you don't know what you're doing. And the people that are trying to sell you all that equipment, honestly, are doing you an injustice. And it's why we see people in and out of the hobby in a year and a half, because all these stores want that gear sale, but they don't think about the residual of teaching. And some places do. I'm not saying everybody, but I've seen this way too often in the past 15 years. Everybody cares about that big sale, and that's all they care about. And it makes me sad, because kids that, like I was when I was a teenager, should be able to do this without having mommy and daddy break the bank. And you can. You just have to find the right person to teach you how to do it the right way. And that's the thing that's going to keep our hobby alive, along with me importing corals and Nic exporting corals.
I think the social media has a lot to do with this kind of thing, because if you look at the social media, especially the social media that backed by major companies, they're showing you, okay, in order to be cool, you got to have this top of the line gear. You got to have the best light. And then you need to have your master scully in this highly pimped up tank. Otherwise, you're not cool. So I deal with customer come in and said, I don't want to see any coral less than certain amount of money. I said, are you kidding me?
Well, that's the thing,
that's a shame.
Honestly, I think one of the most impressive aquariums that I've ever seen was a 180-gallon tank with rock from the front glass panel sloped to the back glass panel. This was years ago, and it was nothing but everything soft coral you could possibly think about. And it had VHO lamps over it and one metal halide, And that thing was absolutely stunning because the polyps were out, the corals were flowy. It didn't have, phosphorescent reds and blues and yellows. And, it didn't, it wasn't like this most insanely rainbow colored aquarium, but the beauty in it was all the corals thriving and surviving and just looking healthy. And that's the thing that I think is the hardest thing for a new hobbyist nowadays, because they're told that they can keep this Euphyllia glabrescens, torch coral, in their aquarium after they've had it set up for 3 months. That's the stupidest thing that a store can do to a new hobbyist, is to sell them a torch coral that the guy's got to pay $100 to $200 to $500 for, and put it in a tank that they don't know anything about. If they just set up an aquarium and learn how to take care of soft corals and dose a little bit of kalkwasser and don't worry about doing anything but water changes on the aquarium, and put a T5 fixture up over it with white light and a couple of actinics, they're going to have extremely good success if they just are patient. If you can't be patient, don't even get into it, because you're just going to throw a lot of money away, and you're going to feel like you failed at the end because you weren't taught how to do it properly, or you didn't teach yourself how to do it properly. And that's, I think, the biggest problem in the industry is, again, Dong, you said it. The internet has destroyed people wanting to do things the right way. They think that they can get the answers by asking all these so-called experts on social media. And, they want to call themselves an expert, but they don't even have a good-looking aquarium. I might have a good-looking aquarium, but I'm never going to be an expert. I'm like Nick. I'm always learning. I'm going to be learning the rest of my life about corals, because there's too much to learn. And I taught myself how to maintain a reef aquarium with a little guidance from my mentor when I was a kid. And it's so simple if you learn how to do it yourself. If you want to learn how to do it all yourself, and ask one person for advice, but figure it out. I mean, I'm a problem solver. Like Nick said, he's a problem solver. I don't want to see any of these animals suffer. And if you're putting your hard-earned money into it, and you're learning how to do these things on your own and reading books, read a book. I mean, a Julian Sprung book goes a long way. Social media is just set people so far back in being successful in the hobby. It makes me sick, to be honest with you. Right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great book. Great book. Every reefer should have it. If you're going to set up a reef
3 volumes
and you want to be a successful reefer, everybody needs to be buying that set of books, and they need to shut their phone down or their social media down and not even talk to people about it. At 2 years into it, a year and a half into it, when you've been able to keep all that stuff happy and healthy, then go on and start giving people advice the right way.
That's the way I started. I just read books like that.
Me too.
Well, these days, kids probably doesn't even know what a book is. Seriously.
Okay.
Oh, you have a video for that?
Pay for the ebook, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think go ahead, Dong.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna wrap the show, but you got something else to say then.
Oh, no. Just thinking about everything is the video. People asking for video. So actually, for matter of fact, like programming a light. So here's an instruction manual. So, what the heck is this? Do you have a video for that? Oh yeah, here's a YouTube link. Oh yes, that's.
We're in trouble because AI is like acting now as like customer service for.
I know, right?
And that's a scary thought.
See,
AI is wrong most of the time.
I like doing things such the old school way. I cannot stand the fact that if I want to get a new generation of light, that I have to learn how to program the damn thing, when every light that I've ever used until LEDs came out was you plug it into a timer, it goes on and it goes off. And guess what? I've had very good success doing that. I've seen too many people with these programmable lights just wipe out tanks because they didn't even know their lights were on 24 hours a day, or they were coming on for 5 or 6 hours every single night and they had no idea they were coming on. That just blows my mind that these lighting companies put this stuff out there and this stuff happens. Nobody's holding them accountable for the piece of garbage they put on the market that killed all the animals that didn't deserve to die because They put the newest and greatest thing out there that's programmable lighting. Just plug a damn thing into a freaking timer and have it go on and off, and set your ramp up, ramp down.
Here.
You know, set your ramp up, ramp down, and put them on a timer anyhow. That way you don't have to worry about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think this has been a very interesting and fascinating look at the import-export business. I'm glad Nic was able to join us for the large majority of the time we spend here. He's a really cool guy, and we need a lot more guys like him on the export side of the business. It sounds like it's too bad that's the exception rather than the rule in terms of exporters. But he's a good dude, and he sounds like he does it right.
He does. Well, him and I hit it off when we first met. It was like he said, he's like my brother from Australia. You know, we would talk for hours, just like I talked with Don, just like I talked with my friends in Indonesia, and that's building a good relationship with people. And I've had other people that I've dealt with that I bought once and was done. And I've got others that I buy infrequently from because they do it good, but they're not great. And I'd rather I choose my suppliers that I've been working with for a decade and a half or more over the ones that I just picked up over the last few years. But I always have to have something to splash in where my suppliers can't deliver, because we're at the mercy of CITES permits. And we didn't even talk about CITES permits on the import-export side, but that can get into a whole nother can of worms, a whole another 2-hour conversation. So I'll let anybody
make it part 2
on their own.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, Chris, thanks, man, again for being on. Always a true pleasure having you on the show. Very educational for sure. I also want to thank the sponsors once again for the live stream. Polo Reef, make sure to check out Polo Reef's latest YouTube videos, and their most recent video, a brutal cold snap hits Polo Reef, and the team is suddenly dealing with problems on multiple fronts. When a heater malfunctions in one of the outdoor koi ponds, the water temperature begins dropping fast, putting prize championship koi at risk inside the facility. The day gets even busier. John and Joe discovered that one of the reef tanks has been overtaken by a serious algae bloom. Meanwhile, Andrew takes the opportunity to experiment with lighting adjustments, something he always enjoys to do in terms of testing and improving coral color and growth. Champion lighting supplied. Thanks, Todd. I know you were in the chat there. Got the lens port. Here we go, man. This lens port is awesome. Chris, man, you got one of these lens port gizmos? Oh, yeah,
I do. I like it a lot.
Game changer. Incredible top-down viewing box using your camera, iPhone, what have you. And big fan. If you want to pick up yours, visit championlighting.com. Also, big thank you to Paul, who is the moderator as well as the president of the Boston Reefer Society. Please join and support your local reefing clubs. They are so important to this hobby. Also want to let you know that all episodes of Rappin With ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. Our next Rappin With ReefBum live stream will be next month, Tuesday, April 21st, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our guests will be Adam from Battle Corals, Kenny Lynn from Pieces of the Ocean, Ray from Pirates Reef Corals, Joe from Carolina Coral Heads. This is an export coral vendor panel, folks. So this is going to be a really awesome show. So until then, be safe and be well. Later.
Thank you.